Hey guys, it's Shaylin and I'm here today with another video. Today's video is very exciting because today I wanted to talk about how I wrote my book and what I learned from it because I finished writing my book. So I have been writing a book called Honey Vinegar for the past 18 months. I started it at like the very end of September in 2018. It took me until yesterday, which was Saturday, March 7th, 2020. This is by far the longest it has ever taken me to write a book. So Honey Vinegar was my 10th book, my 9th novel. Since I have written a short story collection. Definitely the longest it's ever taken me to draft a novel. Before this book, the longest it had ever taken me to draft a first draft of a novel was my first book that I wrote when I was 13 and 14. And that took 13 months. When I was younger, I was writing about a book a year. And then there was a period of time where I started writing 2 books a year. Between the end of 2014, like November of 2014 to November of 2016, I wrote 5 books, which is insane. I just wanted to write as much as I could. I wanted to write as many books as I could. So I was in this like weird cycle of writing books, but like really fast and then starting to hate them. I had high expectations for myself and I wasn't achieving them. I love writing so much that when I wasn't doing it to the level that I expected from myself, I would get really upset with myself, focus that into just hating the project. Fall of 2016, I finished writing my novel Someone Will Save You, which was the last book I wrote before Honey Vinegar. Again, it took me 3 months. And then I stopped writing novels. So I had written that in the winter, and then in the January semester of my degree, I had this really intense semester. I had 2 workshops and they were both pretty intense, and I had to write like multiple short stories and screenplays, and I just had a really heavy workload for school. So I didn't really work on novels. I think I revised a novel, but we don't have to get into that story. I started to get more and more focused on short fiction. I started to really enjoy short fiction. That became my thing. And so I wasn't working on novels. I worked on short stories. I wrote a collection. That was my thing. I got really into that, you know. I didn't feel like I needed to be writing a novel. I was writing a collection, and that's what I was really passionate about it. I still love that collection. So when I say in this video that like I hate all the books I've written, I'm not counting my collection. I feel like the collection was a necessary prerequisite for me to write Honey Vinegar, because the thing about writing a collection is that it required me to change my process. It required me to write slower because they're short stories. You can't write a whole collection in 3 months. Maybe you can. I couldn't. It required me to see how I was approaching my process differently and learn to write more intuitively, because short stories are quite intuitive. You know, I wasn't writing short fiction from an outline. So my process was changing, but the quality was improving. It's insane how drastically my writing improved when I started writing short fiction. I don't think it's just that learning short fiction taught me a lot, but it did teach me a lot. But I think it's also that just like I wasn't relying on all of the crutches that I had in my writing process, like outlines and also writing really fast, that made me feel like I knew what I was doing, but they were harping the quality. It's not like those things are directly correlated to quality, but they were harping my ability to focus more deeply and look more deeply into the story, because they weren't allowing me the time to really like sink into the story. So I started writing short fiction with a different process, learned a lot from writing a bunch of short stories, found my voice as a writer, found my writing style, the style of story I was interested in writing. That goes on through the rest of my second year of university, all of my third year of university, not writing a book, just doing short stories. And then comes time to pick our courses for 4th year. My program, you usually do a novel in 4th year. I didn't want to. This is the funny thing. I didn't want to do a novel for school. I was in this place where I was super into short fiction, was like, I don't really have an idea for a novel. So if I'm not passionate about the project, what am I gonna get out of workshopping the first few chapters of a novel? No, probably not that much, because it's not something I care about. I would rather have a short fiction workshop. That's what I will get more out of. And normally they would offer 2 workshops, 1 short fiction, 1 novel. But for us, they just had 1, because there were staffing issues and it was a novel. It's around May now that I've registered for this, and I have to start thinking about a novel. I hadn't gotten an idea for a novel in years. The only idea for a novel I had gotten was an expansion of a short story. I actually, in retrospect, probably could have written it for this class, but I thought I wouldn't be able to because I had written the short story for a class. There are rules for that in the department, but I wasn't considering the fact that my professor is super chill and he definitely would have allowed it. It's fine because it worked out for the better, but before I'd started writing short stories, I had been really sporadic. I'd wrote in a ton of different genres, but I had settled with what I was interested in, which was just writing literary fiction. Like, that's what I was into, it's what I liked, it's what, the only thing I was really interested in, and I hadn't gotten an idea for a novel except for the one that came from a short story, so I didn't really have any ideas that were adult literary fiction because I hadn't gotten an idea for a novel in years. I went from writing like 2 novels a year and getting so many ideas to just not getting ideas. My brain, I think, was just in short story mode, and it's like I forgot what a novel idea felt like. I sat down, I forced myself to come up with something, and I came up with the very vague beginnings of an idea for what turned into Honey Vinegar, and it went nowhere. I wasn't coming up with any material. I just wasn't thinking about it. The fall rolls around, our workshop is starts in January, and I'm thinking, I've got to get a move on this novel. One day, basically, I was just like, I need to get started with this. I really need to start working on this novel. So I opened up the document, and I just started writing. What followed were 3 of the best days of writing of my life. It's like the story just woke up. Something had happened and I'd managed to press the play button and the story started to go within a couple days, and it was just like the ideas would not stop. It was just like this avalanche of ideas, and worked on drafting the book throughout October and November, and I wrote, I don't know exactly how much I wrote. So the first 5 chapters, it was so much fun. I had no outline, but it's like every time I sat down to write, make a small leap in terms of progress, but that small leap have an exponential effect on the story as a whole. You know, I would write half of a chapter, but I would figure out so much about my character, so much about the plot going forward. I figured out how the book would end within maybe a month or so, that long before I had the entire plot that I could see in my head. I had never just purely discovery written a novel like this before. You know, I discovery wrote my first 3 books when I was between the ages of 13 and 15. I would think about for a really long time before I wrote them, so everything was pretty much sorted. I just didn't have a physical outline. Then of course I switched to outlining. This was my first book coming back to discovery writing. And originally the plan was, I was still so stuck on this idea that I had to outline that I was like, I'll just, you know, discovery write the first 10,000 words and then I'll make an outline for the rest. 10,000 words in, I was like, I am never going back. This is not only the most fun I have ever had writing, but it's the best writing I have ever produced. I'm accessing the story on this deeper level, and it's like I didn't realize what was missing until I had it. Now, obviously, like I said, the process for this book was slow. It was slow. It took 18 months, and so this is kind of the timeline. October, November 2018, I was drafting the first 5 chapters. December, I was revising the first 3 chapters to submit to workshop for school. And then January to about halfway through February, I was revising the chapters 4 and 5. I didn't make progress on the draft. December, January, almost all of February. End of February, started writing again. Wrote chapter 6, 7, maybe started chapter 8. This is where it gets a little fuzzy and I don't remember exactly. March, I revised with the first 5 chapters with all my workshop feedback. Then like April, May, June, July, August, I was drafting the book, so I definitely finished chapter 9. I don't know where chapter 8 fit into all this. Chapter 10 was the hardest chapter of the book. I had a huge roadblock. I was so stuck for so long. This was the hardest point, for sure. This was the hardest point. There was a point that I knew I had to get to. I didn't know exactly how to get there. Eventually I was like, I need to just do this. Started writing it, worked through it by just writing it. If you have to untie a knot, you can stare at that knot for hours and make no progress. You have to actually start untying it to see how the threads are tied up under the surface. And then I think I finished writing part 1, which goes up until the end of chapter 13 in August. Then I took a break. So the whole time I was writing this book, I was actually writing another book at the same time, which is a terrible idea. I had started rewriting Someone Will Save You, which is the novel that I had written before this novel. Started rewriting that a couple months before I started writing Honey Vinegar. And then I was like, shit, I also have to write a novel for school. I hadn't made much progress on that. So I decided that I was going to put Honey Vinegar aside for a few months and finish Someone Will Save You. So I worked on Someone Will Save You like September, honestly not in September. September I didn't write much, I wrote like 1 short story. I think it was October, November. December I decided to do revision again. So I was editing this book as I was writing it, and I'll talk about that a bit later, but honestly that was a godsend. I've always edited as I wrote, but never in a super precise way. In this case, you know, I was not only editing it personally, but like I had workshop feedback. I think I had 3 workshops for this book. For school, I had 2 workshops, and then some friends and I had a workshop. I think they workshopped up to chapter 9 for me. So the first third about of the book, I was discovery writing the book, so getting other people's input helped steer me along the right track, make sure I didn't develop things with huge oversights, integrate any huge mistakes. And because the story was so fluid, like the story was very fluid. The first third of the book, while writing it, things changed so much. I changed so many details. I changed the time period the book was set in, for God's sake. It was very amorphous. So I got feedback on the first third. After that point, things had changed so much that it would have been really difficult for my workshop to keep reading from that point, because everything that had come before had changed a lot, and it just would have been really confusing. So I spent December revising chapters 6 through 13. Near the end of December, I got to start writing part 2. I wrote part 2 from the end of December through January, February, and then just the first week of March, and then we were done. Really glad that I edited it as I wrote. That was the best thing, because now, instead of getting to the end of the book and feeling overwhelmed by how much revision I have to do, I did a lot of things you're not supposed to do. But writing this book really made me realize that writing process truly has no rules. I wrote without an outline. I was writing another project at the same time. I let myself get distracted to write short stories. I edited the book as I wrote it. I had no word count goals. I only wrote when I felt like writing, and I didn't make a schedule, let alone stick to one. I did nothing that you were supposed to do, and it was the most fun I've ever had writing a book. And it was the best book I've ever written. Despite not having an outline, I never really had writer's block. The only time I got stuck was that point at chapter 10. And honestly, in the grand scheme of things, fairly minor. Like, I think even with an outline, you can expect to get really stuck at one point, probably multiple points. It's actually shocking to me that I only really got stuck at one point. One thing about this book that I don't know if I'll ever do again is, like, truly there was no prior planning. And that was circumstantial. Like, that's not normally how I would write a novel. It happened because I had to start writing the book because I had a workshop deadline. I'd always seen myself as someone who had to do a lot of prior planning and who planned very slowly. It's one thing for me to go, oh man, I can't believe it took me 18 months to write a book. That's so long for me. But normally 18 months in, I wouldn't have even started writing. The ideas developed so much faster because I was just drafting the book. Like, actually drafting the book made me brainstorm so much faster. You know, I have other books that I plan to write, and since I got those ideas while I was writing Honey Vinegar, they have just been sitting in my head. So obviously they're fairly planned out. I don't know if this will ever happen again, where I just start writing a book with no clue what I'm doing. It was so fun. Like, it was magical. I didn't know where the story was going, but it was so exciting, and I just let it like kind of sweep me along, and it was so fun to learn things about it. It's the first time I think I've just loved a novel all the way through. You know, I think the lowest point my confidence ever reached was right before I had to hand in my book to workshop the first time. I think I started to do the thing I often do where I'm like, oh, I have to hate this because what if other people hate it? And that was like literally, it was such a small blip that like it's kind of meaningless, where I was starting to get a little stressed because people were gonna read it for the first time. So the stakes felt high, but really that's the only point. And it's not like I hated the book. I think I was just nervous to hand it in. But normally I start to have doubts. I start to feel like the book is not good. Normally, like, my writing process would go as followed. First 20,000 words feel awesome. I'm like, this is so great. This is the best book I've ever written. Finally, I'm writing something good. Then the doubt starts to set in. The writing process is not as easy. I kind of just would limp to the finish line. And then 3 months later, I'd have a book, but it would be a mess. And I would kind of start to hate it and resent it more and more and more from that point onwards. This is the first time I've ever written a book, like, genuinely feeling that I was a good writer. It took me a really long time to be able to say that about myself. For the first time, not counting my short story collection, I truly just wrote for myself. If you had asked me at any point, hey Shaylin, do you write for yourself or do you write for other people? I would have said that I wrote for myself, because that's what I felt like I was doing, that's what I wanted, and that's like what true artists, I guess, I felt did. But in truth, I was writing for other people because I would be thinking about what other people would think about my story all the way through. And I would second guess my choices. I didn't trust myself. I would even it would impact the actual events of the story. I would always be thinking, oh, people like this character, well, like, will they like this ending, like, whatever. And I never did that this time. It was only last week where I realized, wait a second, never once while writing this book did I think about what other people would think about the book. Except for when I was handing it in to workshop the first time and I was worried that it was bad. But like, hypothetical people, I never thought that. I just wrote it based on what I wanted to happen. I trusted the vision I had, and I knew that, you know what, this is my book. I know what's best for it. I can make choices for it. I don't need to feel like I'm stupid and therefore other people would know best. I can just trust myself, trust I'm a good writer, trust that this is my book and I know what I want from it, and just write it for that. Like, I saw the story and I wrote that story. I didn't think about other people at all, and it was great. It's like I said, I would always talk myself into hating my work, and I think it's because that always seemed contradictory, because on one hand I would love my work so much, but I would then hate it because I think felt weirdly ashamed that it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. It wasn't that I hated the work, it was by extension maybe I hated a part of myself for not having written it the best perfect way. I just got over that this time. I just, you know, I feel like Chidi on The Good Place when he's like, hi, shut up, I'm confident now. Like, that's me. And I know this is maybe one of those things that's obvious, but that can be hard to accept, and it's that, like, you don't have to earn the ability to love your work, and that can't be taken away. Like, you can just love your book. Whether it's good or bad, you can just love your book. And obviously, like, some writers are overconfident, some writers are underconfident. I think most writers are both. I have definitely been both. I think I was in this ping pong back and forth effect of being overconfident and then realizing I had been overconfident and then drastically compensating by then being like, I gotta hate this now, and I have to really openly be performative about that. I have to make sure everyone knows that I hate my book so that they don't feel like I'm an arrogant piece of trash who loved her book even though it's bad. I don't think it's possible, probably, to coast at a perfect neutral of self-understanding. I don't think that's possible, but I do think that I'm the closest to that than I have ever been before. Maybe I'm not the closest that I ever will be. I owe this book so much, and I was really emotional near the end of writing this, and you'll see that in the vlog. I started to get really emotional, and that surprised me because I had never had that writing the end of a book. Writing the end of a book always was just exciting. It was like, hey, I'm done my book. Procrastinated starting those last few chapters for a long time because it's like I just didn't want to write the end. I think it's just because this book has brought me so many positive things. It's taught me a lot about myself, what I value as an artist, who I am as an artist. You know, this book, I think what this book really taught me, again, this book in combination with my short story collection, those two together, I think what they did was teach me how to respect my own work. And I never really was good at that. I didn't know how to respect my own work. I almost felt like it was like I wasn't allowed to love my own work. That was a privilege I had to earn. I was worried about like loving my work falsely if it was bad. Like, when you can just love your book. Knowing my story's worth, having the conviction to stick to what my vision of the story is. It's like I didn't trust that I was smart and capable of creating a good story, and so how could I be right? How could I know best for my story? Truly, I do know best for my story. It's mine. I created it. It doesn't mean I don't want to receive feedback and implement it, but look at my book's flaws not as flaws of myself, not go, oh, I didn't do a good job with the pacing here or whatever. That means I'm bad at writing. I can just go, hey, messed up the pacing here. Yeah, I'll go fix that. And so I learned to respect my story, and I think what that means is learning to write selfishly. I literally just wrote the story how I wanted it to go. I have never been more proud of something that I have made in my life. This is the most proud I've ever been of anything I've ever made. And I'm really excited to see what I can do with it, and I feel confident in saying that I think it's a good book. I owe this book so much, so I hope that I can take all these positive things that this book has instilled in me into everything else I write. So in conclusion, I wrote a book, and it made me really happy. Because I've always loved writing, obviously, or I wouldn't have kept doing it for so long. I always loved the ideas, I loved the process of writing, but where I would get stuck would be the ability to love what I have written. And you can see it actually, if you go back, you don't have to. I'm gonna summarize it now, but if you go back and watch the first writing update where I ever talked about this book, you can see that I'm starting to be like, I give zero fucks about anything. It's when I was talking about this book, from the very beginning of writing this book, it just like instilled this give no fucks attitude in me, and I was just like, you know what, I don't care what other people think anymore. I am so tired of caring so much about what other people think, about how I write, about what I write, about whether I'm good or bad at writing. I'm tired of it. It's exhausting me. Peace out, y'all. Like, I'm done with this. And you can see that from the very beginning of this book. And I feel like it was that this book, I was doing everything so wrong that it's like I don't even feel like defending myself, that I was starting to develop this resoluteness about my process. Like, you know what, like I don't have room for other people in my writing process anymore other than my critique partners, but like the rest of y'all and your opinions, like I don't care. I don't mean I don't care about you watching, I care about like hypothetical people, and I also don't care about the people who leave rude ass comments. Like I have not received a single negative word about this book. So generously offering their support for this book helped give me that fire to love it wholeheartedly. I want to say thank you for that and for like loving, like just supporting me through writing this book. It's been actually like a really positive experience to share it with you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can always send me to ask on Tumblr, and I will see you in another video.